All right, Jonathan, thank you very much. Live in Florida tonight. So let's dig into all the legal ramifications of what we are and are not learning from that search warrant. With tonight's panel, former federal prosecutors Jonathan Fahey and Joe Moreno, and former acting chief of the FBI's International Corruption Unit, Ren McEachran. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, Shannon.
So let's start here. There is a statement. It comes from Just the News, that outlet, and they are crediting this to and sourcing it to former President Trump's office. They have this statement. It says he had a standing order that documents removed from the Oval Office and taken to the residence were deemed to be declassified the moment he removed them. The power to classify and declassify documents rests solely with the President of the United States. Now, Joe, there's been a lot of debate over this. What's your reaction to that statement and their characterization of the president's ultimate authority to decide they're declassified?
Shannon, that's almost an open and shut case. I mean, look, if the Attorney General's purpose was to exert transparency, I'll give him that. If his purpose was to project strength in the case that he's bringing, it fell flat big time. How can you possibly bring a case against the one official in our government who has full classification and declassification authority? Are you going to really quibble over whether he did it properly? That hasn't even been litigated as to what the process is. So I think it just utterly showed this was a desperation move by the Justice Department. It fell flat, and they are in damage control mode now.
So this from the Washington Post, an opinion piece. It says Garland should tune out the Trumpists and follow the law where it leads. The writer says it would have been a dereliction of duty for the FBI and the Justice Department to sit on their hands and not try to determine how materials at Mar-a-Lago were handled, who had potential access to them, and what were the circumstances of their removal from the White House. To learn, as federal authorities reportedly did, that more classified documents were possibly still being held at Trump's Florida residence and then do nothing would have constituted willful government failure. So, Jonathan, their argument is the DOJ and the FBI had no choice but to go in after these documents.
Yeah, this argument they had to do it, and they had to do it the way they do it. I think that's, hard to believe. One, they didn't have to do this. These are documents that were in Mar-a-Lago under seal, and they're safe. They're not getting transferred to a foreign power or anything like that. So this idea that there was some urgency that they had to do it before this information escaped, I don't think holds water. They were working. My understanding is they were working with Trump's lawyers to try to work this out, and they did the most drastic thing they could have possibly done. And everything about it, from the day this happened to Attorney General Garland's statement yesterday, really makes us things seem even more political, the way he handled it and the way they unsealed the search warrant. I've never seen anything like that. You normally unseal the warrant and the affidavit, all of this, and they acted like they were doing something for the public transparency because the public had the right to know to unseal the document, but they actually misled the public because they didn't unseal the most critical part, which is the affidavit, which would show what facts they relied on to get this warrant.
Yeah, and we tried to warn people. This is not going to be exciting. You're not going to have all of your questions answered when you get this warrant and this itemization list. It's going to leave you maybe with more questions than answers at this point. In the meantime, Ren, the New York Times has an opinion piece saying this: did the FBI just reelect Donald Trump? America absolutely needs to punish those who commit crimes. On the other hand, America absolutely needs to make sure that Trump does not get another term as president. What do we do if the former makes the latter more likely? I mean, Ren, how likely is the FBI in considering a raid like this and considering seeking out that warrant to go the next step to the political outcome? Do they try to keep that completely out of the calculus? Is it possible to do that?
Well, it's a tough decision, and I think they have to be very cautious when you're dealing with high-profile folks like a former president. But all of that has to be considered and coordinated with the DOJ. I think what's really most important here is not whether it's important to go after the bad guys or subjects, people that may be breaking laws, but how you do that. And what the issue here that I really am kind of questioning is we knew they had the subpoena option, we knew they were cooperating, and they decided to do something that was very, aggressive, when they probably could have gotten a lot of what they needed just through the cooperation part. And that's the best way to gather evidence, is my opinion. That the search warrant is really the last resort, and I didn't get the impression that they were there yet. So something's not really adding up here with the events as they've played out.
Yeah, and so what we know is those communications with the Trump legal team were happening in early June and with the president himself. And there was that request to put the extra padlock on the area in question. And then there was nothing until the search warrant in August and then the raid 3 days later. So, Joe, what we really need to know that will answer all these questions is that underlying affidavits, sworn testimony. You take it to the judge, you get the information. How likely are we to get a look at that? I mean, there are media organizations and others, including Judicial Watch, who filed a motion to unseal it. The judge has said, government, you got it until 5 o'clock on Monday to answer. What's your sense of whether or not the judge would actually release that information?
Shannon, I think as eager as the DOJ was to release the warrant, the 7 pages that we've now seen, they are not going to want to release that affidavit. I think it's going to be damaging to the government. I do not think it's going to be helpful. I think it's going to show that there was a shift in strategy that's not really accounted for here. And to Ren's point, they went from A to Z. And when you're dealing with a former president under these circumstances, they didn't have to go to Z. And so I think that the affidavit is not going to be helpful. And I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, before we actually see that.
Well, and Jonathan, there are those who would argue the affidavit may be very helpful if there are extenuating circumstances or things that, I mean, somebody has said under oath and put their name on it. There could be a lot of information in those interim 2 months that explain what happened on Monday. Isn't that possible too?
Yeah, there is, like, and you've talked about it. There's just a lot of unknowns here, and what they released really doesn't give us a lot of information. And there could be something in there that might explain what seems to be this major disconnect, but there might not be. And back to Ren's point and Joe's point, they did what appears to be the most drastic move when they could have gone down the subpoena road and tried to have it brought before a judge for not complying with the subpoena. But we don't know what's in there, what people have said, what the information is, how they characterize their interactions, and that might be important. But I do think there is a good cause to release it because the Department of Justice was leaking information while this thing was sealed and while the Attorney General is saying they don't want to talk about it. So I think it's a hard road for them to say we want to keep it sealed, but we want to be able to still talk to Newsweek on the side. I think that's a really hard position for them to hold.
Ren, I'll give you the final word here tonight.
Yeah, I think the bottom line here is we need more transparency, and I don't think the affidavit's going to be coming out anytime soon. And the bottom line is we have a lot more questions now. And when you see these other charges and statutes that are mentioned, issues of espionage, it really starts to beg more questions about really what is the purpose of all this. So obviously a lot more to come out of this, but we'll be watching closely.
We will. And with the government's filing due 5 o'clock on Monday, we'll see where the judge goes from there, if there'll be a chance for a reply or if he moves expeditiously. We'll see what the government has to say in potential objection to releasing that underlying document. Gentlemen, thank you very much for lending us your expertise. Great to see you.
Thank you.
All right. Breaking tonight, leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant